The buy versus rent decision. Today we're going to go over a simple way to make the best decision at every military move. What is a question we're really asking ourselves though? Should I buy a home or rent? My name's Evan Kaufman, your VA loan originator, here to help you win a home with VA loan. First, we're going to go over what we're going to cover. We're going to go over the timing recommendation, major move considerations that you need to take into account, and the next steps for when you're deciding to go buy or rent at your next location. So first, looking at the timing recommendation. Let's say you've got your orders. You're in the military. You're saying, hey, I'm moving to my next location. How do I decide if I should buy or if I should rent? We ask ourselves two questions. The first one up front is, do you intend on renting a home at the location for the long haul? Meaning that you intend on having a home as a rental in the long run. If the answer to that is yes, you might want to consider buying. You see it as going to be investment property in the long term. You may want to consider buying a home. However, if you don't want to have a rental or you're on the fence of that home being a rental, then we have question number 2. And that question is simply, will you be at the location for at least 3 years? Why do we say 3 years? Well, at that 3-year mark, you've ideally paid down your mortgage enough, and if the market's had some appreciation, the price has gone up enough to where you won't be underwater on the home, meaning that you could owe more than what it's worth. 3 years is just kind of a minimum standard. Ideally, if you're there for 4, 5, 10 years, that's even better. But we say 3 years to kind of be that cushion mark to make sure that it makes sense. If you're going to be there for 3 years or longer, well, then you might want to consider buying. If you're not going to be there for 3 years and you know it's not going to be a long-term rental, well, then we'll say the taboo answer that a lot of lenders won't say, and that's that you might want to consider renting a home. Because if you don't end up renting a home, you might jeopardize your financial position. Because if it's not going to be a long-term rental and you're not there long enough, you could go back to being underwater on that home. So ask yourself, do I plan on having it being a long-term rental? And then if it's not, or you're on the fence, ask yourself, will I be there at least 3 years? And the longer, the better. And if it is, then you might want to consider buying. Now remember too, we say consider buying and consider renting. We don't say buy or rent, consider. So we're going to go over now some of the considerations that you want to take into account when you're going to this new location to help you decide really, should I buy or rent? Because even if you're going to be there for a long time, and if you know you wanted to say even have it as a rental, for example, if the market's not good for where you're going or you don't like the place and these other considerations don't really go with what you're going for, then it still might not be right to buy a home. So first, looking at a major consideration we take into account, local market conditions. Now, we're going to go over 3 of those, even though there's literally hundreds you can take into account, but the big 3 that we often see. Number 1, population. What does that mean? Well, let's say you're moving to an area where there's an inventory of just 10 houses. Let's say the population, there's 10 people. If that population is growing or at least staying stable, then most likely housing prices will stay relatively fixed or maybe even increase. Housing is very supply-demand driven. The more people are looking at homes and the smaller supply there is, prices generally go up. The more supply there is and fewer buyers looking, prices generally will pull down. So you want to go to a place where population is ideally growing because that increases the demand for homes. Unless, of course, if you are a supply side person listening to this, you know, oh, what if they're building a whole lot of homes? That could offset some of that, but generally population growth is a good thing when you're buying a home in an area. In a minimum, at least staying flat. Because imagine if you are looking at an area where the population is shrinking. There's 10 homes for sale and 10 people, but in 5 years, there's only going to be 9 people or 8 people. There's still most likely those 10 homes there. So what happens to the folks that have the homes but there's not enough people to buy them? That's where generally you see prices pull back. So it's important to pay attention to population. You want to ideally be at a place where population is at least staying flat and ideally even going up. Next consideration you really want to take into account for market considerations would be major employers. Now, this really talking to our military clients and military buyers out there. If you're moving to a new duty station and there's a fort, base, your Army, Navy, wherever you're going for your next location, you want to make sure that ideally your home is within a decent distance from the major employer. And typically for military towns, that's going to be the base or the fort or the naval yard that's there. So you want to make sure that it's relatively close to that. If there's some other major employers, you ideally want to make sure that your home is a decent distance from those. Why? Because people that are moving to a certain city, those are often folks that you might be selling to as well. You want to make sure that it is convenient for them as well. So you want to take into account major employers, where they're located, and then also the condition of those major employers. Kind of going back to the population, are those employers growing or shrinking? Because that could impact the long-term prospects of your home. Now, lastly, school districts. pretty common sense one for a lot of folks they know. School districts oftentimes will objectively correlate with home values. Higher rated schools can impact the value of homes. It's shown to have a high impact on home values. So you want to pay attention to what school districts are nearby you. Now, objectively, you can look at a lot of different places to see ratings for schools, but just know it's important to pay attention to school districts of where you're at. And knowing that, again, the folks coming to buy there are often going to be similar to you. So you just want to take that part into account. What are the schools like in the areas I'm going to? We see a lot of folks take that into consideration when they're going to buy their next home. So, local market conditions, population, major employers, and school districts are three things, but they're not the only things. There's a lot of other ones that you want to take into account. But if you're considering buying and considering renting, you want to start looking deeper at those considerations. Next consideration to take in is the time frame of buying. Let's say you've decided, hey, Evan, yeah, I want to have it as a long-term rental. Well, now we got to account for how long does it take to actually buy a home? Because if you need to be there in 2 or 3 days, might not be able to buy immediately. You might have to make some adjustments. What's the time frame it takes to actually buy a home? Clients that are reaching out to us that are moving cross country, making a new PCS military move around the country, they're usually coming to us in that 60 to 120 day window. 2 to 4 months out, that's most common. Some folks are way ahead of the game, 6 months, even a year out, but most folks are going to be in that 2 to 4 month window. But the actual time frame it takes to close a home, generally you need about 30 days from contract, meaning you put an offer in on a home, they accepted it, to closing out. That 30-day window is kind of most ideal for it. So if you've decided, Evan, yeah, I answered yes to number 1 or I answered yes to number 2, and I do want to consider buying. Yeah, local market, I like it. I feel really good about this. I want to buy. If you have 30 plus days, then you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. If you're at that 30, 60-day window, you really want to reach out to lenders such as us to get the ball rolling, or someone who's really good with knowing your needs for buying. You want to reach out right away. If you're under 30 days, that doesn't necessarily mean don't buy. Just know that you might have to close a little bit after you get there and make some accommodation arrangements for when you close. So the home buying process as a whole, you usually see it around that 30-day mark, but know that you want to prep ahead of time if possible. Next piece that we want to understand, if you're deciding that you want to buy a home, you need to take into consideration how you're going to buy it. Now, there's 2 major ways of funding homes when you buy. You can buy it with cash or you can finance it. So if you're moving and you're buying with cash, if you have the money to do so, very simple. You go through the process of buying it with a real estate agent. Awesome. You're going to just fund it yourself. You don't have too much else you have to worry about. If you're going to fund it with a loan, there's a bunch of different options that are available to you. Now, for our military families that are making the decision when they're PCSing, there's 4 major types of loans that we kind of see come across and folks deal with. That's the VA loan that we're going to talk on, tremendous product for military members that we'll touch on here. There's conventional loans, the most common loan that's done out there. And there's FHA loans. We see those done quite a bit as well, but they should be a little less common for military families. And then lastly, some folks that we work with that we don't end up closing a loan with, they'll sometimes work as seller financing, deal with a seller. Those are significantly rare, but you do have the ability to where if you can get a seller who, let's say, owns a home and has no mortgage, they could potentially finance the home to you. Just know it's a little more complicated. We see it done, but it is one way that you can go about financing a home. But for our military members, most of the time we see them dealing with either a VA loan or a conventional loan. And the big one, though, is the VA loan because it's unique to military members. You can be active duty or a veteran and utilize a VA loan. We have a whole lot of good information on the VA loan, how it works, the details of it, the process, all within our channel here that you can watch as well on YouTube and other areas, and it really can help get you informed. The key here is knowing, as we talk about considerations, is that if you said, yes, Evan, I think we want to buy, because you answered yes to number 1 or 2, then you want to make sure you understand the VA loan if you are military, or active duty, or veteran. Now, the deal with the VA loan is there's 3 major benefits. Number 1, you can do 100% financing, or think of it inversely as 0% down, and not be punished with private mortgage insurance. That's a monthly cost where if you're doing a conventional loan and you're putting less than 20% down, you have to essentially pay a monthly penalty because you're putting less than 20% down. On VA loans, that's not existent. You put less than 20% down, you're not getting penalized with private mortgage insurance. Now, on top of that, because we're getting a guarantee from the VA, they don't fund the loan. We talk about that in other videos. VA doesn't fund it, but they guarantee it for lenders. That makes them a little more secure of an investment for lenders, meaning that you will typically get more competitive interest rates on a VA loan than a conventional loan. Now, some folks will ask, Evan, I see the interest rates are the same. Really depends on the lender. You want to work with a lender who gets VA. And if you have someone that works consistently with VA loans and does it a lot, such as us, you will generally see a better interest rate on a VA loan than a conventional loan by far. It's an important one to make sure you take into account. So know that those are some of the benefits with a VA loan. Very incredible product. I'll even throw in there that VA loans have a very unique ability to do a streamlined refinance called an interest rate reduction or finance loan. The only loan type out there that has an IRRRL, and that allows you to do a refi without doing an appraisal, without income verification, and minimal documentation to get it done. Lower cost, fantastic product. Watch other videos on that one. Only a VA loan. So there's just some nuances there that military members have that you just don't get with the other loan products. So you want to know, if I'm going to buy, understand the VA loan and understand how that compares with a conventional loan. Because overall, when we run our example of a VA versus conventional loan, we'll typically see that interest rate at anywhere from 0.5% to a full percent different. And when running two scenarios on a $500,000 home, when we break that down, the cost savings on a VA loan is nearly $100,000 versus a conventional loan. Tremendous savings over just a 10-year period when you're dealing with a $500,000 home. Big difference. However, we'll also be the first to admit that the VA loan isn't just the golden answer to everything. About 80-85% of the time, we say that it is the best for a lot of folks, especially active duty military movement and veterans who have VA disability compensation. It's wonderful. But there are some scenarios where conventional loans can be competitive. Again, the key is working with a lender who understands those differences and can help you make those comparisons to make the best decision. So, where does all this really come down to? If you're trying to help make that decision of buy versus rent, the next steps forward, reach out to us. We're happy to talk about it. We're built a little uniquely as a lending company because we cater to active duty military moving around the country. Meaning that if you're making a move for multiple times over your career, we want to be there with you. We have folks that we've worked for now on their third and even fourth PCS. Meaning we want to make sure we get your next purchase right. So sometimes that means you might want to rent. The big example that I always give is when we're working with military, that all of a sudden you got your next assignment, you're going to a school. You're going to be there for 12 to 18 months. If you know you don't want it to be a rental, it's okay to sometimes consider, hey, I might want to rent this home. And we're happy to bounce those ideas off of each other so we make sure we don't jeopardize your long-term financial success. My name's Evan Kaufman, again, your VA loan originator. Happy to help you go out there, win a home with a VA loan. Hope this helps.